Manipur, a state in northeast India, is a land of stunning beauty and ancient traditions. However, beneath the picturesque landscape lies a history of ethnic tension and violence. The current conflict between the Meitei and Kuki communities, which escalated in May 2023, is the latest chapter in this troubled history. The Meiteis, predominantly Hindu, are the majority group in the Imphal Valley, the state's heartland. They have historically held political and economic power in Manipur. The Kukis, primarily Christian, are concentrated in the surrounding hills. They have long felt marginalized and excluded from the state's development and governance. The current conflict was sparked by a court order that granted Scheduled Tribe (ST) status to the Meiteis. The Kukis viewed this as an attempt by the Meiteis to encroach upon their constitutionally protected rights and privileges. This ignited long-simmering tensions, leading to widespread violence, arson, and killings. The Meitei Intellectual Circle, a group of academics, writers, and activists, grapples with the escalating crisis. They condemn the violence and call for peace and dialogue. However, their calls for peace are often intertwined with a deep-seated fear of losing control over the valley, their homeland. The Kuki community, on the other hand, stands at a crossroads. Decades of perceived marginalization and the recent violence have fueled a growing sentiment of alienation from the Manipuri state. The demand for a separate Kuki state, once a fringe idea, is now gaining traction among the community. They argue that a separate state is the only way to ensure their safety, protect their cultural identity, and achieve true self-determination. The recent violence, in their view, is a stark reminder of their vulnerability within the existing state structure. The Kuki community's demand for a separate state is deeply rooted in their lived experiences of marginalization and insecurity. They point to the lack of economic opportunities, inadequate infrastructure, and the underrepresentation of Kukis in state institutions as evidence of their marginalization. The demand for a separate state, they believe, is not about secession from India, but about securing a space where they can live with dignity and security. The Kuki community is aware that their demand for a separate state is likely to face stiff opposition. Despite the challenges, the Kuki leadership remains steadfast in their demand for separation. They argue that a separate state is essential for their survival and for the long-term peace and stability of the region. The current conflict in Manipur is part of a larger pattern of ethnic strife that has plagued the northeast region for decades. The region, home to numerous tribal groups with distinct languages, cultures, and histories, has witnessed waves of violence and insurgency since India's independence. The arbitrary drawing of state boundaries during the colonial period, coupled with post-independence policies of assimilation and neglect, have fueled a sense of alienation and resentment among many tribal communities. The Kuki community's demand for a separate state must be understood in the context of this larger history of ethnic conflict in the region. The Indian government's approach to these conflicts has been largely reactive, focusing on containing violence rather than addressing the root causes. There is a growing recognition that a purely security-centric approach is unsustainable, and that a lasting solution requires addressing the genuine grievances of the people. In the aftermath of the May 2023 violence, the Kuki community, disillusioned with the state's response, has taken steps towards self-reliance. Thousands of young men and women have volunteered to join self-defense groups, determined to protect their villages and communities from further attacks. These volunteers, many of them farmers, students, and daily wage laborers, have taken up arms with rudimentary training and often inadequate weaponry. The formation of these volunteer groups highlights the erosion of trust in the state's ability to provide security. This mobilization, while providing a sense of immediate security, also carries the risk of perpetuating the conflict and undermining the prospects for a peaceful resolution. The Meitei community relies heavily on the state apparatus and the central government for its security. They view the Indian Army's deployment in Manipur as crucial to maintaining order and containing the violence. The Meitei leadership has called upon the central government to take a firm stand against separatism and ensure the unity of the state. The Meitei community's dependence on the state for security, however, is a double-edged sword. Addressing the underlying issues of marginalization, discrimination, and historical injustice is crucial for achieving lasting peace in the region. The current situation in Manipur is complex and volatile. The violence, while seemingly contained, simmers beneath the surface, threatening to erupt at any moment. The presence of armed groups on both sides, the deep-seated mistrust between the communities, and the lack of political will to address the root causes of the conflict create a fertile ground for further violence. The Indian government's response to the crisis has been widely criticized as inadequate and lacking empathy. The deployment of the army, while necessary to restore order, has done little to address the underlying issues of marginalization and discrimination that fuel the conflict. The international community must break its silence and urge the Indian government to engage in a credible and inclusive peace process. The future of Manipur hangs in the balance. The silence of the Indian government and the international community on the plight of the Kuki people is deafening. The lack of condemnation of the violence, the absence of calls for accountability, and the muted response to the humanitarian crisis unfolding in Manipur raise serious questions about the commitment of both to peace and justice. The Indian government's silence can be attributed in part to its fear of setting a precedent. The international community's silence, on the other hand, stems from a combination of factors, including a lack of awareness, geopolitical considerations, and a reluctance to interfere in the internal affairs of a sovereign nation. This silence, however, comes at a heavy cost. Breaking this silence is not merely a moral imperative, but a strategic necessity. The path ahead for Manipur is fraught with challenges. The deep-seated mistrust between communities, the proliferation of arms, and the lack of political will to address the root causes of the conflict cast a long shadow over the future. The Indian government must move beyond its security-centric approach and engage in a meaningful dialogue with all stakeholders, particularly the Kuki community. This dialogue must be inclusive, transparent, and aimed at finding a lasting solution that addresses the legitimate grievances of all communities. The Meitei community must acknowledge the historical injustices faced by the Kukis and work towards creating a more inclusive society. The international community has a crucial role to play in supporting peace-building efforts in Manipur. Addressing the root causes of conflict and promoting peace and justice in Manipur is not only a moral imperative, but a strategic necessity for ensuring stability and prosperity in the region and beyond.